Hi friends, my name's host Eric and I am absolutely outraged to be the host of Talking with Famous People. This is my outrageously angry and outraged love life partner, Rachel, who's outraged to be here with me today in an outrageous fashion. So, today we explore the notion that algorithms like anger and outrage. I'm not actually going to be outraged or angry, but I'm going to talk a lot about outrage and anger. Which would you rather be, outraged or angry? Outrage implies some justification, right? Your evil doing has caused me to be outraged. Whereas anger, less specific. I could not have good cause and still be angry. Like, I was angry at Delilah today for bringing something up that was a harm. Well, I mean, I guess I brought up the subject, really. Well, then I got into another little argument about COVID today. And I was a little outraged. But of course, I am putting onto Delilah a position she doesn't really hold. I just have this sort of basic notion that whenever we're talking about the harms of it, we're not talking about the harms of catastrophizing something and being alarmists and taking unproven and extreme and disproportionate measures to prevent something that we can only know so much about. So anyway, but we resolved that. She was mad at me, and then I was mad at her, and then we argued via text for a bit, and at the end, I guess I just had to acknowledge that, look, the bottom line is, what makes me mad is that just that you're talking about the specifics of it rather than a framework issue. And, your specifics may be correct, but even articulating those is playing right into the wrong narratives. So, because it's not paying attention to what it needs to be paid attention to, which is this clusterfuck of a disaster of a lack that happens in the lack of a limiting principle framework, any kind of sense of what ought to be prioritized when and for what reasons, So, anywho, but mostly this is about outrage and anger because yesterday Winston's mom told me that they're loved by the algorithms. Well, I think right now neither Delilah nor I feel bad, but I think the thing is, we go from feeling fine to feeling mad to feeling bad to feeling fine very quickly. So it's like, I was feeling fine. I was happy enough to talk to her, but I made the mistake of saying, she's sick right now. She's got a cold of some sort, and she told me she was going to go get tested for COVID, even though she's like ultra vaccinated, right? And I said, I made the mistake of saying, I hope it is COVID. And she was like, why would you hope that? And I was like, well, because you've taken all these super extreme measures, followed every bit of protocol they could possibly throw at you, and you still get it, which proves my point that to the extent they're right, these efforts are doomed to have only some success, depending on the context and a variety of other things, and it's presumptuous to assume impacts that we can't really establish, So, but then she said, well, that's terrible because if it is COVID, then, and she started articulating these, like, long-term effects of it or whatever. And that's where the argument started because, as a general rule, I'm very skeptical of these long-term effects of COVID. I'm not disputing that it's possible and that, in fact, some people do. I don't doubt that plenty of people experience a variety of symptoms after getting COVID that they then attribute back to COVID. But whether or not there's an actual linkage is very much a different question for me. Now, I would say that probably the linkage that's most clearly established is between this purported loss of smell and taste. I mean, the thing is, I don't doubt, Diamond, that getting the vaccines bolsters your immune system's response in ways that are beneficial in terms of how it interacts with the COVID virus. There's no reason to doubt that, in the sense that, like, we already knew before we tried to make a vaccine for this, though nobody listened to Eric, remember, that it's not actually possible to make a vaccine for coronavirus that works in the same way that other vaccines do because of the nature of coronaviruses. That we can make a vaccine, but you'll have to get boosters every 4 months or something indefinitely. In other words, it doesn't stick, right? Because of the nature of coronavirus. And I'm not exactly sure the biomechanics of the whole thing, but coronavirus has historically successfully avoided the vaccination tactic in its more familiar form, the common cold. So, the current symptoms that they're listing, the top 5 symptoms of the Omicron variant are all the same as symptoms for a common cold. So it's like, that's, at this point you're going, all right, well, how distinct is this variant of coronavirus in terms of how we should treat it differently, since its symptoms now appear to be the same as the common cold, this variant anyway. But that's early. This is early projection from data. There's not a whole lot of data out there to project from. So I grant that these are premature conclusions. We don't know for sure that this variant isn't going to turn out to have big impacts that we haven't anticipated yet. But that's true for everything in life, And that's basically the problem. Since it's true for everything in life, we have to have a framework discussion about which of those things justify massive shifts to the status quo, massive assertions of control over individuals' behaviors, bodies, etc., and which ones don't, and why. If we're not talking about that, then we've got a serious problem on our hands, which is whoever successfully has the mic controls the policy by simply articulating a set of possible harms that might happen if we don't do their policy. And everybody's sort of obligated to go along with it because, well, it does make you a little bit safer, I guess. It's what happens in the absence of good thinkers in charge of speaking the public narrative. You've got instead people committed to presenting good thinking on the thing, but not capable of it themselves. And that's where you get this weird like science fetish, where you get policies of people getting banned from Reddit of all places for putting COVID misinformation. Now, I agree, spreading misinformation is bad, but why so disproportionate a response regarding misinformation about COVID than, say, cognitive functions? I don't see C.S. Joseph getting banned. I typed an ENFJ earlier today in a typing session, and DSP had typed him as an ISTJ, and he was SI polar AF. So it's like, what is DSP even doing? He's got not even close. My work just stopped requiring me to be tested each week because they couldn't help but notice the only people that are getting COVID are vaccinated. A policy change I can get behind. Well, hi Ian. Speak of the ENF Jevil. right there, it's Ian, and it was OPS. Well, I said DSP. DSP is the same thing as OPS. DSP is Dave's superpowers, and he's in charge of OPS. So, you and I are not in disagreement about who did that. CS Joseph is a different matter, and I did mix him into this conversation a little bit, but after I started talking about CS Joseph, I said, and DSP mad. So, I don't think I shared it with him privately, and I indicated if he decides he wants to publish, he can just email me and I'll publish it. But try not to pressure him. People don't generally like being pressured into doing things like that. So, just giving a little FE advice to my FE polar friend Winston's mom. Somebody's got to be FE polar out there. So we had a bit of a scare earlier cool, thanks. So anyhow, my dad had told me on Tuesday night that he was coming home Thursday morning. He's going to leave early Thursday and be back sometime Thursday. And then he didn't get home yesterday. He didn't come home yesterday from his vacation. And by this afternoon, I still hadn't heard any update from him about anything, which is very, very unlike him. So I tried calling him, I texted him, his phone went straight to voicemail, and he didn't reply to my text very promptly. And I just started talking through the thing about with Rachel and realizing, like, this is really uncharacteristic of him to just, neither show up nor update me about his new plans. It is fairly common that he'll change his plans partway through and stay an extra day or something. That's fairly common, but he always notifies me. So, anyway, I got a little concerned, and we called down to the condos and had them go knock on his door, and he was in fact there, and he called me, and it turned out that he had notified Cameron, who's working at our house right now, that he'd be back on Saturday, like, presumably in some exchange about the progress on the painting of the bathroom, and he forgot to tell me. So leave it to the ESTJ to remember to account for the person working at the house. Anyhow, he's fine, but it did make me.
We were both nervous because, I was concerned too. I was like, "Whoa, it's Friday!" That doesn't.
Right. It started making me think about like having to handle everything myself. Basically, having to handle the estate and the family and the.
That was the first time that I was like, out of the group of people, I was like, "Oh my gosh, it could be him." That's reality.
And it's really kind of a frightening thought, being the patriarch. I've been able to live as an adult male, knowing that, it's always been clear that Delilah and me and my mom are all part of Dad's family. Okay, he's the patriarch. And there's no doubt about that. And even when I was off living totally on my own and not seeing my parents very often, I still operated under that basic principle that Dad was doing Dad stuff, So well, I was gonna wait a little longer for him to see if he replied to my call or text, but then I started thinking it would be very not to be expected with my dad. But you know how old people sometimes fall down and can't get back up and stuff? And if my dad fell down, he would be able to get back up just fine. There's no way he'd fall down and be like, hey, he's not a feeble old person like that. He's a he's quite a spry, robust 84-year-old. And in fact, he had his phone off because he had gone to the pool. And when they came knocking, he was getting out of the shower. Apparently they came in, they were worried. I successfully worried the desk person enough that they went into his room when he didn't answer the door. And he was just coming out of the shower naked, so... That was probably not the ideal outcome, but still, at least I got a phone call from him, and his thing was, well, what's up? He was concerned something had happened with my mom. I don't mind the fact that Mikhail was hidden because he was trying to put some random link to something that...
Suspicious?
Oh yeah, I wouldn't try to go there if I were you. If I were you or me. And I am one of those two.
Yeah. You are one of those two.
My clients got us a nice gift today in addition to giving me a check for work done. They got us a couple of eighths of weed. They got us this nice clay one that we like. This is the thin mints, or no, face mints. And then this is Green Dragon OG. Let's try some. Let's see what we think. Let's enjoy some. Let's have together enjoyment. Are you outraged by my together enjoyment? If so, what's wrong with you? There's something terribly, terribly wrong with you that outrages me. What could it be?
They talk about 9 Enneagram having anger problems.
Do you have anger problems?
Probably.
What do you think an anger problem looks like?
Well, according to them, it's like shoved under the rug instead of like dealt with. So like it'll come out randomly. Like they said that like road rage could be like
road rage?
Like passive aggressiveness. Passive aggressiveness is a sign of like a 9 getting angry.
Well, in general, I see you as subject to frustrations from TE stuff. Things are... If you're not TE front stack, things are hard in general. For me too, but maximally so in the 7th slot. And it leads to frustration. I get a lot of frustration when it's like I'm trying to do something and then I realize, first I have to do this, then I have to do that, then I have to do this, then I have to do that before I can even do the thing I'm trying to do. So fuck it. I hate that shit.
Yeah.
So I started watching some Finding Bigfoot. And I gotta tell you, they sure are having a hard time finding Bigfoot. Do you know that Finding Bigfoot has 12 seasons? It's like you'd think they would have found him by then, right?
Right.
Well, you don't think you have that ordinality problem, you just don't like it? Well, what I mean is, for example, like this is the worst case scenario for me. I want to do something, but it requires that I log into my Mia account, which I don't have the password for. And some reason I didn't save it in Chrome, and I'm not quite. And then it's going to send the reset password to this old email address that I used to use that I have to log into again in order to access again. But I forgot the password for that. It's like that kind of shit. It just makes me throw up my hands and go, okay, fuck the world, fuck off. I want nothing to do with you any longer. Just leave me alone with your requirements and demands and and get a yeah and find a thing and put a yeah in there and push a yeah. Yeah, it's like, okay, enough.
And push him. Ugh.
There's only one Yeti? Is that a bong? This bong has no name. But if I were going to name it right now, I think I'd call it the Green Bong Turn.
The Green Bong Turn. I like that.
It's like the Green Lantern, but it's a bong instead.
Yellow.
Or you could consider it an intern. Really inexperienced. It's a green intern. That's double inexperienced. So there's a term that people who want to be interested in the paranormal but don't want to be thought of as kooks use, and it is high strangeness. I believe it was made popular by billionaire Robert Bigelow trying to do his UFO research and such. You're so FE, Rachel. Just because I'm looking to see what you're doing doesn't mean I'm judging it.
I am so FE, y'all. Like,
oh my God, you should have seen her jump into action last night when I put the football game on briefly while Cameron was here. Because I put it on the TV, which means it was only showing on this screen and not that screen. Now I guarantee you, if Cameron had been sitting here and Rachel had been sitting there, she wouldn't have said a goddamn thing about it. But because Cameron was sitting there, she's like, "Oh my God, don't do this. Put it on you can't put this on because that's Cameron won't be able to see it because that screen won't show it." Which tells me she's experienced that plenty of times and not said anything to me, probably. Oh, Bigfoot gets seen, Chris LP. It's just, you don't seem to understand. Bigfoot's, one of its main attributes is being blurry. It's got a natural blur function to it. It also has a dart out of sight in just a half a second function. So it gets seen very often. It's just always blurry and just jumping out of sight. That's how you know it's Bigfoot. If it doesn't do that, it's probably a fake.
Bigfoot actually has been seen, though. Like, we've seen on Paranormal Activity, right?
I've seen some pretty convincing Bigfoot clips. I've seen some very convincing ones.
Very.
There's this one that showed that there are these guys who are hiking off into the wilderness. They're like on this one ridge, right? And they see on this other ridge really far away, relatively far away from them, like, too far for anybody to get to, right, in any convenient way. They see this, and it's out in the middle of fucking nowhere. They see this big, dark, bipedal figure going down this slope at just like an incredible rate, and is obviously huge and dark, covered in something. And it's like, you look at it and you go, that has to be a Sasquatch. There's nothing else it could possibly be. There you go. That's what they call armpit action.
My armpit is this one and this one.
Do people tie their egos to their dominant function, i.e. are they self-worth fairly determined by the extent to which they perform well with their dominant function? No, I think they tie it to their third and fifth. I think people understand that they're excessively their dominant function. It's one of the reasons why it's your dominant function is you even get that. Whereas, that's the holistic understanding of a function, is to completely and fully understand a function and have it be your dominant and control your ego block. You've got to have clarity, as much clarity about when it's appropriate to use and when not, as you do about deafness and using it, So it's like you define yourself accordingly by the things that constrain it in the ways that are consistent with your tool and your dominant, which is, in order to feel self-worth as an NETI person, I need to attain broad affirmation acceptance in the sense that people pay attention to me, right? And they say, okay, well, you're at least interesting. And also that I validate on NI grounds, which is to say, I'm happiest when my songs are instances of an archetype that really resonate as such, and I feel least satisfied when they're too particularist and original. I'm not saying that people couldn't put together these assorted hoaxes. In other words, is it conceivable that hoaxers who are very determined could put together a very convincing fake Bigfoot video? Yes, for sure. But it's also possible to evaluate the people who are saying this isn't a hoax. Because, in other words, I think you're overestimating the willingness of people to be hoaxers, to be convincing hoaxers. To be convincing hoaxers is to lie very convincingly, repeatedly, under multiple sets of questioning, and under broad public scrutiny, in a way that is a lie and is also convincing people that you're not lying, and that puts your basic credibility as a person on the line. So it's like, I don't think there's a whole lot of, maybe teenage boys want to hoax, but you don't really see these videos being made by a bunch of teenage boys, right? No. So, when you see an interview of somebody who maybe got a little bit of a snippet of video, and they say, well, I just got my camera up right at the last second, but I tell you, if I shit you not, it was blah, blah, blah. You can kind of read the person, their motivations, what kind of person. You can read their type to a certain extent. You get an INTP telling you that, and you can tell they're an INTP, and they're qualifying it with all this sort of, like, I don't want to make any kind of dramatic claim here, but I mean, it's indisputable what I can't help but describe what I literally saw, and it has a bunch of, like, the right framework that they're expressing. They're a pretty convincing witness. I mean, eyewitness testimony counts as evidence in a court case. I agree that eyewitness testimony about high strangeness is less meaningful because it doesn't purport to have an existing explanation that we can check against. I can see how the third plays out that way, but not my fifth. I reject particular things in favor of NI validating things unless I'm just not seeing it. I think that's how you behave publicly, but in terms of what actually gives you satisfaction. So, for example, if I think you're talking about how you argue, not how you are. And that's, you're saying, consciously, I use my TI with my NI, and that's how I go about my business. But when it's talking about your self-esteem and stuff, what having SI fifth means is you remember instances of you being successful, being cool, pulling it off, and instances of getting that affirmation from other people in the past. That's reminds you that, yes, I have good self-esteem. You can recall a bunch of examples that would support the resolution that you should have good self-esteem. Rather than check to make sure your NI was right in previous instances when it overreached as usual. Sorry, ESTP. Oh, I mean, I just had this argument with Delilah, right? That it clarified for me a lot about the differences between ESTPs and ENTPs and why they're not necessarily always going to see eye to eye. At the end of the day, Delilah cares about being rational given the way things are. You know, it's like shit's how it is. So here's the most rational behavior and the reason and the justification and etc. And she's really neutral when evaluating things. But to me, I'm attached to the idea. So I mean, I'm using my FI more than she is, really, in some sense. I'm attached to the idea that we should not be talking about anything under the existing frame. We should be attacking the existing frame. You know? And so it's like, if you correctly articulate some harms of COVID to people, medical harms to people from COVID, it's going to make me angry. Because it's going to remind me of the fact that we never finished discussing the fact that we were sold this bill of goods as a 4% fatality rate. And it was, as Eric said, at least a tenth of that. And so why don't we reevaluate our initial go-ahead, green light on this whole line of nonsense in terms of how we should, as a society, deal publicly in terms of policy implementations with threats like this, where's some sort of standard that we can compare against and say a threat must be this significant before this much action is taken in terms of implementing restrictive policies or policies that interfere with people's day-to-day business, you know? That's a real question that needs to be asked and answered. And so when people start talking to me about things in the status quo, given the fact that we haven't talked about that, and accepting that reality, like, okay, that's not the topic of conversation, so let's have a more practical conversation. It makes me angry, because it's like, how can we, having a more practical conversation about it now is just conceding framework. It's agreeing that it was okay in the first place to enter into this whole clusterfuck of a disaster the way we did, you know? And that's the difference between ESP and ENTPs, is ESTPs are fundamentally more practical minded, and if it gets too abstract, it's like, it doesn't really matter. And really, COVID is the first time I can really ever remember having something. I mean, I remember arguing with Delilah about abortion before, but I don't care about it at all. So I may think she's wrong about it, and I may think she's being kind of irrational about it, but I don't care. So I don't want to argue with her about abortion. I think I had like one argument about abortion with her, and then I just stopped having the conversation.
That's like how we are. Like, I'm pro-abortion. We just don't talk about it.
Yeah, and I don't care about it. The thing is, I understand that it's okay that some people have positions that differ from mine, and it's fine, you know? This is a uniquely COVID thing. It's like, COVID is a unique, unprecedented shift in paradigms on a lot of different levels. And it's incredibly divisive, because one side has a lot of ability to concretely make their arguments in terms of impacts that they don't have to establish even without getting credit for them. And the other side is flailing around, not sure what to say about it, while still disagreeing and sort of grumbling and being pushed around by the other side. And the thing is, if the solution, if the correctness includes one half of the population pushing around the other half of the population with this sort of stick jabbing, yeah, you take that, you wrong people. If it includes that, it's not a good frame. It's not the right solution. It's not okay. And that's what we have right now. We've got these very fussy alarmists and or health professionals or whatever that are always pushing for more and more and more, and let's never discuss the frame. Let's just reinstate a mask mandate. Except this time, we won't talk about enforcement at all. It's like talking out of both sides of your mouth, right? It's like, are you mandating it or not? If you're gonna force everybody to do it, take responsibility for that and actually put some force behind it and see how people respond. Actually send the cops house to house to check to make sure people have their masks on at their family gatherings. Well, the thing is, what is particularly being ignored here regarding the COVID thing is the FI-SI combo. If you have FI and SI as absolute values, I think regardless of where they are, if you have one at least of as an absolute value, you're going to have some sense of how negatively it might impact the other person's experience. Particularly if you have SI somewhere conscious, you have the means to understand how it might negatively affect another person's experience. So why is it that I get to patronize this business with no mask on, but Joe has to spend all day with his glasses fogging up because he's got to wear this uncomfortable mask that he doesn't like to wear, and it builds up frustration over the course of the day, moment after moment, day after day, and it's a completely unnecessary bit of health theater that, given the fact that nobody else is wearing masks, it just renders him into a subhuman class, a non-essential person, basically. And it's wicked and wrong. It's absurd. It's something that society should be deeply ashamed of. And instead, we're talking about what the proper amount of bullshit to pour into the milkshake is, rather than whether we should be pouring bullshit into this milkshake at all. Right. Maybe we should stop drinking this milkshake instead of trying to take more bullshit out of it and make it more milkshake and less bullshit. Then maybe we should just acknowledge this milkshake's a lost cause. Let's toss our existing paradigms on this out the window and revisit the topic from the start, as we should have discussed it in the first place, before taking a bunch of unjustified action. And this is where the anger at the 8th slot gone awry in society is going to manifest. If an ESTP is going to be equivalently angry, they're going to be angry at a situation in which a clear course of action was necessary to be taken. Like, who would be angry most angry at Neville Chamberlain trying to work out a deal where he gives Hitler Poland in exchange for Hitler not attacking anybody else? Who's going to be most angry at that? ESTP, because here's a guy still trying to talk and negotiate when one clear course of action needs to be taken, and that's it, ESTP is going to be livid with Neville Chamberlain. Equivalently, I am livid with the world for doing the exact opposite. Exactly when more talk needed to be happening, instead of less action, we took impulsive, unjustified action and dismissed the need for the discussion at all. It's rotisserie stupid, it's called. It's a special technique of cooking. It involves rotisserie convection action plus stupid equals COVID policies. So you see, I'm outraged. I'm angry. I'm angry about being outraged. And I'm outraged at the anger.
I freaking hate going shopping wearing a mask. It's so annoying. I sweat so much. I sweat so much because
these days you can generally not wear it and nobody says anything.
Not in small stores.
Maybe in the mall it doesn't work like that.
Yeah, not really.
When I go into the gas station, I don't usually put it on.
That's good.
But yeah,
I'm happy to hear that.
It's like California has had this patchwork sets of policies. California, the mask mandate was lifted June 16th or something, and Newsom declared California's reopening day or something. And then many counties, including Los Angeles, have had intermittent mask mandates here and there, coming in, going out. You never know when it's on or off, depending on spikes in the numbers that are, there's been an increase in new cases in Los Angeles County. Oh, here come the mask mandates again. Okay, it's gone down again.
Do we have a mask mandate right now?
Yes, they just reinstated it through January 10th in all of California, except this time they won't say whether there's any enforcement of it or what kind of enforcement there is, because that's what got them in trouble last time with the population, was when Newsom tried to tell everybody they couldn't have their families over for Thanksgiving.
Wow.
It was like, okay. Yeah, it's like, I expect myself. Well, I mean, look, it's like freestyling. If I could just freestyle songs and be famous for my ability to make up new songs on the fly and have an audience for that or something, and I'd still be working towards making each of those freestyles as NI resonant as possible. And to the extent that I could do that, it would be because those freestyles would be so NI resonant that they immediately appeal to people. Because usually people need to listen to something a few times before they really get it embedded into them. That may be an SI bias, but I mean, the thing is, at some level, if you want to understand people as their type, it's best to start with what are their absolute values. And remember that for an ENTP, their absolute values are intuitions and feelings. And so no matter how logical or argumentational they are, at the end of the day, we don't really care about the logic of things. And what we care about is playing what we want to do and doing what we want and being loved and being able to behave as intuitives, which is to say a whole lot of sound and fury signifying nothing. We'd like it to signify something, though. If to the extent that you get famous, then it signifies your 7th slot FI. Well, I want to be famous. Well, I mean, you must have some less selfish justification than that, Eric. I mean, I can come up with lots of good reasons why the world would benefit from me being famous, but why do I want to be famous? Because I want to be famous. It's a desire I have. I desire it with my desiring bone. So, I mean, look, for the INTPs, you're always going to note that this is still somewhat art. That no matter how much effort Eric puts into it, there's some wiggle room in these things. There's a little bit of wiggle room. Like that ESFP who's got her engineering degree, her TI polar looks a little less like a fish out of water than the TI polar of an ESFP who's been an entirely non-academic life, It's going to look a little different. There are particularist elements that are going to impact the things, and that's frustrating for NTPs who would like it to lock down into definitive, concrete, empirical lengths that they can reliably expect to build a fully defensible case off. But it's still somewhat art. It just is. It doesn't change the fact that it's fundamentally correct. It's just that I'm sure there are ways to test things that I haven't quite figured out yet. I do think that my new NI test is great for polar, which is well, I mean, it is just as bad. It's just that it doesn't, like TI polar and ESFPs who don't have an academic history sounds like they don't get what you're trying to get at, even. Whereas TI Polar and ESFPs, who do have a strong academic history, get, oh my God, it's these kind of questions. And it's a different kind of response as an affect or emotively. They don't display the complete lack of awareness of it as a modality that some ESFPs do, but they still fail to get any of the questions right. So, you know, and the thing is, but the thing to remember is there will be some fourth slot TI people who are going to test almost as bad. You know, it's going to be hard to distinguish between fourth and seventh, depending. Or some slots that aren't seventh may be really bad at it anyway. And I would say the way to distinguish is you'd have to do a whole bunch of TI testing, starting with very simple ones, and do a lot of it on people who don't want that kind of testing done on them, and then compare those results against each other, and that's how you determine exactly where the line is. The problem is, as a practical implementation, people who, if you wanted to be precise about whether they're very weak or polar, those people are the people who least want to answer a bunch of very small distinction in terms of increased complexity TI questions to figure out exactly where the differences are. They don't want to answer those questions. They don't want to have pinned down exactly how dumb they are about this, right? So that's reality. And you could say, I would say that we could absolutely, if you hired people of given types to sort of willingly go through repeated testings with variations that didn't let them memorize the exact thing, so they couldn't take advantage of any SI that they might have, then you could probably get a very strong correlation between scoring here on this highly thick kind of thorough TI testing versus here would correlate with slots. I think it probably would. Now, as far as the SI thing, the SI polar is probably more definitive in the sense that, but you will get some false positives from INFJs and potentially INTJs, because both INTJs and INFJs tend to assume when you're asking for specifics that you want what those specifics mean, not the specifics themselves. And you have to say, no, I actually do want the specifics, and then you'll usually get some out of them. So how much do you have to push on a given INFJ to make them reveal their capacity to articulate a bunch of specific details? Depends. And, it's like, is there a way to standardize this so that it meets all of the robust demands of a hard pressing INTP? Yes, but not the way I'm doing it. You have to have a bunch of subjects and direct them to, do each of these functions individually, and have a bunch of data to look at, and you'd have to be more standardized in your question asking than I am. You'd have to figure out which things are correlates and how strong, and versus which things are just sort of random noise in the data. I mean, it would be a lot of TESE work in terms of organizing the data properly, setting up the test properly, and looking for patterns that are actually statistically significant in ways that you can establish against some other concrete metric. And so, is it possible to make it all happen and slam into place like hardcore science? Yes, absolutely. Am I ever going to do that? No, absolutely not. That's not my business, right? My business is having happy clients at the end of the day. And that also shows you F, N versus kind of T, S priorities. I ultimately am happy with happy clients and feeling like I'm doing the best job at this thing and I'm right, to the extent that I was able to successfully standardize it so that it was fully implementable by anybody, I would lose my value as a typologist. That's not saying that is motivating me not to figure it out, but it certainly means I'm not going to direct a whole shit ton of attention to exactly how to standardize it so that you can use it just as well as I can, without having the same kind of capacity to intuit things. Because in the current status quo, it requires my intuition, not just my TI, to type people. If it just required my TI, then that means we'd have tests that no matter how much you knew about them going in, it would successfully type you as meow. And that would set a incredibly new high bar for psychology. Like, if we could do that, have a test that can definitively tell you whether you're meow and be proof against self-reporting biases and be ungameable, so that maybe not completely ungameable, but that to game it would require study and practice rather than simply knowing about it, would be, wow, you've really accomplished an amazing thing that psychology has never accomplished before. In fact, instead of trying to accomplish anything like it before, it's always said, let's instead make sure that people who are getting tested by psychology tests don't know what they're being tested for. So it throws out a lot of red herrings and false impressions to the people, so that they don't really know what they're being evaluated on, so that that doesn't influence them. The idea that you could produce psychology tests that they do know what they're being tested for, and they can be influenced by it and still not impact the results, is it's like the Rosetta Stone of psychology, right? The main topic, Terry Kilgore, is that I am outraged by your question. I'm outraged, I'm angered, and I find your question outrageous. What you should be saying is, I, Terry Kilgore, am outraged by the lack of a clearly identified and followed through upon topic that I can sink my teeth into in a predictable way. And in that case, I'd say, hey, welcome home. Welcome home, friends. Your outrage, your anger, your terror, your sadness, your joy, all of these are welcomed here. How would an ESFP female be around an INFJ male? My brain is trying to unlock a puzzle. I don't think ESFPs behave particularly different around different people. That's the types that kind of morph who they are depending on who they're talking to the most would be ENFJs, INFJs, to a lesser extent ISFJs, ESFJs, FE1 or 2, It's fine, Terry Kilgore. I don't mind sending back a scout to retrieve you from the wilderness in which you find yourself lost currently. I know that can be a panicky experience. Which way's north? Which way's west? Where's south and east? All I see are these bears around me. Don't worry. Look, I'll shoot a flare gun up and you can find your way back that way too.
You have an eyelash.
I'm outraged by that. What could be more outrageous than an eyelash? Jeremiah, you know my anger, you know my joy? Probably. You might say that I wear my emotions on my sleeves. If you want a typology question that you can test yourself with right now, I'm going to tell you one. It is this. How am I, Eric, feeling right now? Do you know? How many opinions do you have about it? Do you think, when asked the question, do you think, well, let me think about it? Or do you immediately go, you seem meh. If you are FE high up, you probably are readily able to evaluate my emotional state and try to answer that question. So you're able to directly turn your attention towards the cues I might be giving or have been giving regarding what kind of mood I'm in and be able to probably answer that question. Whereas if you're an FI person, you'll more easily be able to answer the question, how am I feeling? I, self, not Eric, feeling right now. And you know what, Winston's mom, apparently that link there, I need to take that away, that link. I need to replace it with a Google Docs link to a document that explains the instructions for how to book a typing session. But thank you for that. It reminds me to do that. Your brain is not an organ, okay, Elise? You only have one organ, and only men have them. It's the penis. It's the only organ that is in a human body, or on a human body, or attached to a human body. Dangling from a human body. He was being needlessly nice. Thor was. Well, leave it to Thor to be needlessly nice. ENTPs often feel grimy. I felt very gratified when somebody left a comment the other day describing the instrumentation in Pasanti's Ghost as grimy. And by that, they didn't mean like the artist Grimes. Rather, they meant grimy like gritty. But more wet. I'd say grime is grit with wet. With moisture.
Yeah, I feel a little grimy.
Can I look at your comment at 5:35, please? Legends Fall says Dentici and I are struggling with it. Yeah. Okay, I'll look right there and see what you say. You say meow. Well, I don't know how to respond to meow. Regarding not fitting into my box, I probably look somewhat like an ENTP when it comes to metaframes, etc. because I self-studied a ton of philosophy as a young person. I thought I was supposed to be the smartest person around or else worthless. Or at least the least wrong person around, right? Did you ever really believe that your correctness links to intelligence? I'm not sure I ever really believed it. I do now, sort of. But I don't really believe in intelligence anymore, so I guess it kind of cancels each other out. You know, I'm as stupid as I am smart in lots of different ways. I'm stupider than Einstein when it comes to relativity. And I'm smarter than a dog when it comes to speaking Latin, even though I don't speak hardly any Latin. True. Least wrong is most right. I agree. But correctness and intelligence, well, before I learned about cognitive functions, I hadn't really put together the reality that every time people were talking about intelligence, they were talking about two different things. One of two different things. They were talking about intelligence as understood in terms of solving a problem and or attaining outcomes, and or they were talking about intelligence in some sort of legalistic parsing kind of way. And now that I've gotten to cognitive functions, it makes a lot more sense to me why I never really believed myself to be smart exactly. It's because half the people were telling me I was an idiot, though not explicitly, and half the people were telling me that I was a genius, though not explicitly. What psychologists study versus psychology can actually be different, so that's true. This is that episode where we tell people what grinds our gears, right? What grinds our gears, or what mashes our potatoes? No, that would be a good thing probably. What's another equivalent to grinding my gears? Chapping my hide. That really chaps my hide.
I never heard that before. It's new to me.
That's a real burr underneath my saddle. That's the fly in my ointment. Not quite the same thing.
Something with biscuits.
Oh, that really butters my biscuits. No, that would be a positive thing.
Yeah, that is a positive thing.
That really bespeaketh of biscuits. It really bespeaketh of biscuits.
Bespeaketh of biscuits.
One of Shakespeare's little known, underappreciated sonnets. Bespeaketh me of biscuits. Bespeaketh me of biscuits.
Bespeak me of
psychologists do study the brain. Well, psychology doesn't really want to define itself very much. If you try to look up definitions of it, it basically says anything and everything having to do with human beings, which is ridiculous. So, I mean, basically there are 3 branches of psychology. There's research, there's theory, and there's practice. So, but you could say there's 4. There's research, theory, practice, and pharmacology. So, research is any kind of psychology things that do research on people and how they are, you know. Practice is usually like, so tell me about your mother. What's your relationship with your mother like? Let me find out about you. How much of who you are is trauma? Let me find out right now. I'm sure it's all of it. Says the NFP psychologist. Just kidding, NFPs, just kidding. Okay, then there is the psychology that is that's theory, which is like, okay, here's why people who've experienced childhood trauma act weird. Here's what it's called, and here's the different ways it expresses. So if you look at something like attachment theory, it tells you if a child doesn't form healthy attachments when they're in a certain developmental phase, then they won't ever really be able to form healthy attachments, and it'll express as some form of unhealthy attachment style. So there's one healthy attachment style, and there's like 4 different expressions of unhealthy attachment style. Now this is a good theory. It makes good sense because, first of all, it doesn't mince any words. It says there's only one way to have a healthy attachment style, and that is to have been raised with at least one adult who really loved you and you can count on, you know. And so if you don't have that, if even there's nobody like that who doesn't betray you in some sense, and your reasonable expectations as a child to be prioritized in certain ways, then you're going to screwed up. And it seems like that screwed up self expresses in distinct patterns. So it's a good theory because it's observationally sustained that most people who have a healthy attachment style don't abuse each other, and that some people do, and that expresses in different distinct ways. And it also makes good intuitive sense because in any way you test the expression of it, you can easily enough convert it into the currency of trust, which tells you it's the right metaframe for that question. Unfortunately, I have nobody to blame but my nature and my just lack of character, I guess. It's like I was perfectly raised. My parents loved me, and they also didn't let me run wild. They, expected a reasonable amount of stuff from me, but not too much. They were perfect. And I didn't learn a goddamn thing. I mean, the thing is, how do I explain people who had really nice childhoods but still grew up all messed up? Well, they're messed up in ways that don't like to trust. So it's like if they had really good childhoods, or even just adequate childhoods. In other words, if they could adequately develop and have imprinted on them an expectation that the people that they trust most as sort of their biological kind of trust weren't going to betray them in fundamental ways. If they learn that in childhood, then they're going to come out messed up in certain ways, but it's not going to be linked to an attachment issue or a trust issue or an inability to believe that people won't betray you. It'll be linked to something else. Well, I mean, look, having an avoidant attachment style, if you say that, you are beginning that sentence with, I have an unhealthy attachment style. There is no, you might say you're attachment avoidant, but that would not be your attachment style, which if you were healthy, it would just be described as healthy. You'd be describing something else more particularist, right? You'd be saying, I personally tend to be avoidant of attachments, and that's fine. I do it in a healthy way. I don't put on to the other person ontological attacks in order to, as an expression of my avoidance. So, anyhow, when you're talking about psychiatrists, you're really talking about neuropharmacology, which is to say, the psychiatrists don't really know why this drug or that drug does this or that a lot of times. Sometimes they know somewhat. With long sets of drugs, they've got some understanding of what the mechanisms are of them. It's pretty clear what the mechanisms of dopamine or serotonin or reuptake inhibitors are, for example. It's clear enough that patients can clearly understand a metaphorical presentation of what's going on in the brain, right? But with other drugs, there's not any clear explanation. Well, why is it that when you combine this drug that does this thing and this drug does something unrelated, it creates this third effect of meow that causes a person to go from meow to meow? Then it's like, they don't know. It's pretty much trial and error. So, and when they find something that works, it works, and that's good enough. They don't need to know why, as long as it works, although they'd like to know why, right? So, the thing is, it's understandable, it's accepted in general in the medical community that if a person is going to be treated with medication, and that's in fact what they need, that they might have to try a few different things to see which medication works for them. Now, you'll note that there's an equivalent reality in sort of practical therapy kind of psychology, except without the concession on the framework. Whereas the psychiatrist will say, well, we don't really know why it works, it just seems to work. We've tried it with lots of different people. The psychologist will say, this is my explanation, which suggests a given frame of reference is predominant, even though the answer is, well, we don't know exactly what frame to use here. That's the truth. But I've found that talking to people this way works this way. That's not what you'll hear from a psychologist. You'll hear instead a bullshit answer about this. It's just expressive of their frame, which is not acknowledging the fact that none of these frames are predominant because they're not the correct metaframe. Now, sometimes you don't need to access the correct metaframe. If it's traumatic, if it's trauma-based stuff, then that's different, right? It's like any given individual might be more or less well attended to regarding their trauma by somebody who has more or less knowledge of cognitive functions. But at the end of the day, it's not a cognitive function thing, right? How I react to trauma might link to my cognitive function type, but that it will have negative impacts on me, and that long-term expressions of it will probably be not consistent with our normal understanding of healthy functioning. Then the issue there is it's like a psychological injury, and the problem that we have now in psychology is it's failing to distinguish adequately between these kind of classes of things. So when we're talking about personality, we need to make sure we aren't talking about it in a way that gives people we have to make sure that if we're going to pathologize something, we're not just talking about personality. So like in the status quo, you've got people talking about various expressions of personality that don't uphold under their frame bias as being pathologies of some sort. Things like ADHD or or autism spectrum. Those are the ones that come to mind immediately because they're saying, okay, your lack of FE means there's something wrong with you, or your being an action type means there's something wrong with you. I mean, in general, there's this swath of various pathologizations that go on that are actually linked to cognitive function stuff. Like whatever narratives are dominant around you, if you're hearing a lot, you need to stop worrying about what people think so much. You know, you're being oppressed by an FI frame as a universal frame that's garnered universal acceptance when presented as such. So nobody ever says, no, actually I should think so much about what other people care. I should care so much about what other people think. It's natural for me to do so, while it's not natural for you to do so. And so it's appropriate for me to care so much about what other people think. I agree with you that I shouldn't let other people's opinions sway me from what I intuitively, personally, and authentically know to be good and true and correct. But that doesn't mean that I shouldn't want to have both, right? You're saying be okay with just one. And I understand that that's totally legitimate for you, but it's not for me. Nobody ever says that, right? They just go, oh, I guess I shouldn't care so much what other people think. I guess I'm too much of a people pleaser. They just internalize that bullshit. So, I mean, and that's just one example. FE does its own kind of frame bias imposition. Like, somebody raises some legitimate objection and they say, why can't you just be a good team player? I mean, why is it always about you? Why are you always having this problem and that problem? It's like, sometimes we just have to buckle down and take one for the team. And it's a way of their delegitimizing the individual's authentic objection. That might be an FE thing about masks and stuff.
You know what I feel like? I like how they do it in Japan, where if you feel you're sick and you want to wear a mask, then you wear a mask. But, like, there's no mandation to wear a mask. Do you know what I'm saying? Like that's, if you feel like wearing a mask and you want to, go ahead. But, like, it's not mandated for you to wear a mask. It's by choice.
Well, I mean, the thing is, a TE frame of reference would say, who cares what people feel or think about this? We know more clearly what we need to do, and if everybody has to put up with some discomfort for a bit, and just because some fussy people don't like it, too bad. We all got to just put up with it and deal with it and tell me, That's much more like a TE frame of reference that says, we ought to keep my larger picture understanding of the problem in mind, as opposed to any particular complaints which are limited in scope and temporary, with the person not really realizing that their TE frame is predicated on assumptions that haven't been established as legitimate, and yet removes from people the capacity to engage in that legitimizing process first. So, all of this is very good stuff, by the way. I know at least S might find it boring, but I'll tell you, this live stream has been nothing but gold.
Thanks, Bay. I think so too.
We're in agreement. When these words you hear hit your ears, you experience a deep satisfaction of knowledge and truth that resonates in your gut, down through your loins. It'll appear, chunks of it will appear in your poop when you go to the bathroom next time. That's how deeply embedded the joy, pleasure, and authentic education you get from talking with Spanish people is. Instead of having public schools, why don't we just do this? Sky Gear was grinding your gears? Sky Gear, were you INTPing somebody? You know what I said about that? You keep your INTP in your pants. I've told them that many times. He's always whipping it out and TINEing on somebody. Oops, did I get some of my TINE on you? He'll say. And I'll say, you put that INTP back in your pants right now, Sky Gear. Anywho, I'm sorry you got his intellectual man seat on you, Elise S. Here's a napkin.
I'm gonna have a great New Year's Eve because Cobra Kai comes out on Netflix that day.
That's pretty exciting. December 31st. Season 4 of Cobra Kai, in which Johnny and Daniel team up against the old bad guys from Cobra Kai. No, I don't want my napkin back. You can keep it. Thanks. Thank you, Dallas. I appreciate your affirming my declaring this to be extra A+ high quality. If this live stream were eggs, it would be extra large A eggs, not regular size eggs. If this live stream were milk, it would be whole milk, not low fat or non-fat milk. If this live stream were a livestock, it would be a cow, which is the biggest of the livestocks. If this live stream were your face, it would be absolutely gorgeous. It would be you looking your very best, making heads turn everywhere you go. That's how great your face would be if it were this live stream. Don't feel bad. Don't compare your face to this live stream. That'll just make you feel bad. Instead, just realize that this stream not only entertained and informed you, it also made your face a little bit more beautiful. It either increased your symmetry, decreased your age lines, it may have applied oil of Olay rejuvenating serum to your face, or you may just have benefited from some of the splash from INTP Sky Gear's intellectual man seed, which is known to have facially revigorating properties. To revigorate is to take something that once was vigorous, has lost its vigor, and to make it vigorous again. That's what's required to revigorate. Corey, you know what Corey said about Matt Denny's?
What?
That place sucks.
Ooh.
He just pulled an ENTP move.
He did.
Remember when you told me you liked Alice in Wonderland, Rachel? What I said to you?
What did you say?
I pulled the classic ENTP move. When Rachel said to me last night at dinner that she liked Alice in Wonderland, I think it was last night, I told her, that thing has no storyline.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't have a storyline. She just kind of floats throughout the whole thing. And she even she floats in a bottle during it too.
There you go, buddy.
But yeah, I'm a big fan of the 1951 Disney version of Alice in Wonderland.
And then I felt bad when I realized that, oh, I did that thing. You know, it's the classic ENTP move. Somebody tells you, oh, I really like this. Oh, well, that's shitty in the following ways. Oh, did you care about it? I'm sorry.
Luckily, I have backstack FI because I don't give a F because I just love her.
Right. Well, also, I'm not normally like that. You know, I'm a somewhat more practiced with my FE than that usually.
I don't know. It's alright. Like, we're not gonna like everything the same.
Well, the key thing is, it's like when you brought it up, I just immediately thought about it and sort of remembered my position on it. You know, I didn't think about it in terms of you saying, I didn't think like, okay, well, see, here's the deal. If you tell an FI person you think it's shitty, then they're offended. If you tell an FE person they think it's shit, you think it's shitty, then they think that you think that they have bad taste or something, right? So I don't think any of those things. I just said what I remembered my basic position on it to be, which is the reason I don't like that movie is it doesn't seem to have any plot to it. Basically, it's just like girl goes down a hole, a bunch of crazy shit happens, girl comes out of a hole, it was all a dream. And so it's like, but it didn't occur to me that, you know, most people, when you tell them you disagree with them, it has some F impacts. It's not just I disagree with you, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's, you know, that case would have been better to keep quiet than like saying, like, what do they say? Say nothing at all. If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all.
Or better to remain silent and be thought a fool than open your mouth and remove all doubt.
It actually didn't hit me like that, because like I love the movie so much that it's like you can like tell me that and I'd still be like, I love it.
Desert INTJ echoes your feelings on it when he says it's about the adventure. And I mean, it seems to me that's...
I love the visuals too.
I also would say it's consistent with somebody who's got expert intuition, 5th slot, that they would not find the randomness of it to be a problem.
Yeah.
As long as it was rendered well and visually and stuff. And I've never had any opinion.
For me.
I've never had any opinion about the visuals particularly. I agree, it looks nice. It's a cool old Disney animation. It's got some cool songs in it and stuff. But I guess the reason I had that position on it, which I hadn't thought of in years, is because I'm an NE Dom. So I thought, well, this is just too random. Anybody could. This is too easy to do random. You gotta give me a little bit more storyline to grab.
Yeah, it's very short. It's very short. It's like close to an hour 25, something like that. It's really short. I think that's why I like it too.
That'd be like FE polar versus FE 8th or 3rd or 4th. I'm not sure. I see. I missed the first part. Well, what's the difference between not noticing those F impacts and noticing but ignoring them? I mean, I just think it's T above F. However you want to put it. It's like T above F means that you have to, you know, you understand the T aspect of it first. If you talk before you continue to understand other aspects of it, then you know, in this instance, I understood the N. I used my SI reminded me what my N on it was, which was boring. I don't want to watch it. It's like when I used to work in special ed, some classrooms, especially when I was a substitute, they put on movies like that for the kids, and that was one that I didn't enjoy very much, so I didn't want to see that one really. So I knew what my position on it was, and I knew why, the TI part, which is also kind of NI-TI, right, which is it fails to meet this NI metric, the TI way of expressing an NI value. And then I said it, and then sometime after saying it, in fact, it didn't even occur to me until she said something else later, but sometime after having said it, that's when I do the F evaluation, if at all, you know. Maybe I see some change in her facial expression, but she's an INFJ. I can't read her for shit. She doesn't display much, you know. So it's like sometimes I have to have something dramatic happen to draw my attention to the reality that I've probably been ignoring something or not noticing something that's causing her less than ideal, in something less than ideal, but she's not gonna reveal it unless it's Well, I mean, like was quick to jump on. Make sure to not put the football game on because Cameron can't see it over there because that screen won't show what's on the TV if I'm showing the TV.
Yeah.
So then I put the football game on the computer instead of on the TV, right? So that then we could all see it.
Mm-hmm.
But she's immediately quick to jump on that shit. As soon as when Cameron's over there. Sure, all right. But if it's her sitting over there, she'll probably go back and forth. Oh, should I bother Eric to tell him about this? Does he know? Does he know? But I'm not. He's not doing it. Or and all that shit probably goes through her head, right? Meanwhile, I'm oblivious until something makes me go, oh, the reason. Obviously, I'm intuitive. You know, the reason it doesn't take a lot of intuition to figure this out. The reason she's aware that if you're watching something on TV over here, it doesn't show on the screen over there is because I've done that to her probably multiple times and maybe not even been aware that it was not, she wasn't even able to see it. God knows, I could have maybe even sat here for an hour talking to her about it as though she could see it. And I wouldn't know, you know, so it's, it's the life of an INFJ.
That is so funny. They do say that, Mirage types look funny. They are funny to the outsiders. Like, it could be, like, whatever. I think that's good. That we make people laugh.
Yeah. So, you know, I have to try to be conscious, actively include in my calculi how Rachel feels about it because she's, in other words, because I'm genuinely very cool and not putting unreasonable expectations on her, or really any expectations on her, or in general, not being bossy, not being wrong, and not trying to take over her, you know, not trying to take her over in any way. I'm not bossy, and I don't presume to tell her what to do. And I don't judge her for if she doesn't follow through on something she says she's going to do or something like that. It doesn't matter. And she's never going to hear a peep out of me because, of course, if I were going to judge her for something like that, I'd be incredibly hypocritical since I frequently don't follow through on things I say I'm going to do. Because when I say I'm going to do something, half the time I'm just sort of musing out loud. I'm not really committing to doing anything. So, the thing is, in that regard, she's going to always be thinking, well, this is within the range of what Eric could take and still be fair. And so I don't want to say anything because he might be able to then say, it's fair for me to take that, and who are you to say something about it? Even though I never would ever say anything like that.
No, you wouldn't.
That's where the miraginess comes in a little bit, you know? Yeah. It's like, we don't really believe in each other's actual self enough to commit to taking certain risks that TI and Effie would normally maybe want to take with each other. Sawadi Bath. Sawadi Bath.
Hello, Sawadi Bath.
Sawadi Bath. Is that a special kind of bath?
Yeah, I was curious about that too.
In which you bathe in mint-infused waters and drink yogurt from a can. A Sawadi bath is one in which all the waters are infused with mint, and while you're bathing, you have to continually drink yogurt from a can. I would get on it, okay? Alright. I'll tell you what. I'm going to end the stream. I'm about ready to end the stream anyway. And I got a typing session coming up at 6 o'clock, but in the interim between now and then, I will make that video. Okay, it's already set up, so it'll be easy. Alright, friends. I want to wish you a very happy evening time. Oh yeah. I won't be able to do it properly live. So, I want to wish you a very happy evening, a very pleasant evening. How do you get a typing session? You PayPal me $50. If you PayPal me $50 and put in the note your email address, then you will receive an email from me saying, thank you for purchasing a typing session. What day and time do you want? You'll then tell me the day and time. I'll put it on my calendar and send you a calendar invite, which includes a Google Meet link. Here's my email address. So step one to booking a typing session is, I'm going to put at because my 2 key is sticky. So I don't want to push at because it might stick and become a bunch of 2s. But yeah, you PayPal me $50 until Christmas. If it's after Christmas, my price is going to go back up. Although I have to say, I've been very pleased by the response on the typing session sale. In other words, I've gotten way more than twice as many bookings than I normally do at half the price. So even though I tend to think, I mean, I don't know, I have a high opinion about the value of my own time. I tend to think that a typing session for me is easily worth $100, but then there's the other reality, which is how affordable people consider something. Like, it determines whether they view something as sort of a luxury purchase they might make one day versus something that they can do right now. And the $50 sounds a lot more like the latter, and $100 sounds a lot more like the former. So I'm kind of curious as to, when the sale ends, I'm going to go back to regular pricing for a little while, but then I may end up having on a temporary but no sunset date shift to the lower price and see what happens. Because if in fact I could continually get this rate of session bookage at $50, and it's not just a burst of sales in response to the fact that it's a sale, if in fact I could consistently get this rate of bookage, it would make more sense for me to do it than to do more sessions at a lower price, because it's not like I'm overworked, It's not like I'm slaving down at the fabric factory all day long. So I could put in some more hours. And at the end of the day, what I think it's worth is not really very meaningful. It's how it really has something to do with how large a segment of the population or potential purchasers of this I can potentially access, and how willing they are to do it. Like I said, $50 and $100 sounds a lot different. You might drop $50 going out to eat. If something costs $100, you think, okay, that's just. Well, I mean, the thing is, I don't know, Rain. I don't know what the answer to this question is. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how much. I mean, and Peter didn't teach you. I thought about that as well. The possibility of just doing regular sales like JCPenney. The goal would be to cover for your weak biases depending on the type. I mean, no, the goal is mostly just self-understanding. So there's no way for me to cover for being FI polar, but there is a way for me to accept being FI polar and to recognize how it means I will reflexively express certain biases, and I can be less likely to express those biases in ways that are just expressions of my unconscious frame bias. So it's basically a way of enabling your free will, but you're never going to attend via those other modalities. You'll simply understand the equivalency of their legitimacy. So it's a way to attain an actual humility in one sense, and a way to a way to understand the world that begins with the right question and answer. The first questions anybody should ask themselves when they're understanding the world or having a framework about things is, why do I have this framework, and why don't other people agree with me necessarily? So most people just argue their positions, and they project their frame bias and say, this is how it should be, but they don't say, here's why I think it should be like that, in a way that's neutral, that affords each of us the same kind of fundamental subjectivity in some regard. Your typing sessions still come with a guarantee of TI argumentation on your behalf of one's type. Well, I used to say, and it was definitely a joke, since no such organization exists, but that if the Typology IRS audits you, I will be there at your hearing. The thing is, it's a nice metaphor because it explains what actually happens, which is, if somebody questions your typing and you say, well, Eric typed me as this, and if you really want to question my typing, listen to the arguments he makes at the end of that video and explain why he's wrong. Now all of a sudden you put the onus where it belongs. If somebody's going to negate what you say about your typing, and you've got a piece of evidence available, this is of course if you publish, but if you've got a piece of evidence available, you can point to them to that and say, oh, okay, well, if you're so clear about my typing, then what are your response to the things that Eric says here? And put a link to a timestamp at the end where I'm explaining why you're whatever type. And of course, they're not going to want to do that. They don't want to actually have to evaluate something in order to form an opinion. They don't want to have to actually make real arguments. They are telling you, I'm going to intuitively negate, based on my intuition, I'm going to negate what you're telling me. And I'm probably doing it because I want to take control of the emotional space, rather than because I actually intuitively disagree with what type you are. Yeah, sure. Sure, that'd be a fun video to make. Desert INTJ. Also, there may be a more optimum value between 50 and 100 that maximizes the cost times frequency product. That may be the case. If you have any particular thoughts on how to figure that out, I'd be happy to hear them. I'm not that kind of TE-ish math whiz, so I don't know. Okay. Right, yeah, you don't announce future sales, obviously, until you have them, because people will wait. If you have regular sales, though, then you'll become like JCPenney, and people will learn that they just need to wait. Okay, goodbye, my friends, for real this time. I'm going to say goodbye, adieu, goodbye, and don't forget to eat plenty of cheese.